Hi everybody, my name is Jin Ben and welcome to iHome Church. This morning I have a question for you, and the question is, what does the Book of Hosea and an American Quilt have in common? Well, for me, both of these works represent a symbol of unity, and they both express a very clear message that basically says that rough past and difficult present can have a beautiful future. So both of these things are an expression of incredible hope for me in my life. And I think it can be a source of great inspiration for your lives as well. Well, when we look at the book of Hosea, we realize that the prophet prophesied in the 8th century BCE during a very troubled and a difficult time. After Jeroboam II died, you have a succession of 6 kings within the time frame of 22 years. And in 721 BCE, Israel is destroyed. So you can imagine that this is probably one of the most difficult times for people living in that time frame. And it was prophet Hosea who spoke to them, or was able to convey to them a sense of hope and a reason to go on, because his message was a message of God's steadfast love and unfailing love. And we realize that the book of Hosea is one of the clearest statement on God's transcendence, meaning that God is not among many powers. God is not a power among many, but God is above all and yet related to us because we are his and her children, and God is our heavenly parent. It's a really incredibly beautiful message. And for me, the most striking thing about the book of Hosea is that Hosea's message from God comes from and through his troubled family. He is asked by God to take as a wife a prostitute, and really her infidelity towards her husband, or Hosea, symbolizes Israel's infidelity to God. And even the children that they have, one is named Jezreel, or Lo Ruhama, meaning no pity, and the other one is named Lo Ami, not my people. These are not the most inspiring or empowering names that one can choose for one's children. That would be almost analogous to you and I naming our kids Holocaust, or Not My Grace, or No Mercy anymore. This is a very devastating and a very blunt name, kind of expressing the reality of the times. These are not people, and no pity. So this is really a difficult time for the people that Hosea was prophesying to. But we realize that regardless of when the prophet preached, the centrality of the message of steadfast love and unfailing love is incredibly relevant, not only in his time, but also in our time as well. And when we ask ourselves, well, why is the message of the book of Hosea so relevant in our modern day? Well, it's really relevant because it's a story about a family. And we learn about God through people close to us, or through our most important relationships. In essence, it is through the struggle and joy brought about by our own family members that we learn something of God's presence. When we take on the opportunity and the responsibility of having families of our own, and we experience what an incredible joy, and yet at the same time a responsibility it is for us to have kids of our own, we realize that some of the most beautiful and the hardest lessons learned that helps us to become that wise men and women of God is through the trials and tribulations of dealing with our own family, the difficulties or the sufferings or the joys that we go through. This is what makes us human. This is what makes our life truly organic and real. And it is through these experiences that we become an incredibly wise and hopefully and a loving person in the process. And so the book of Hosea for me is incredibly important because it's about the importance of family dynamics. And regardless of what we go through in terms of different phases of our life, perhaps dealing with our spouse or dealing with our children or dealing with our in-laws or dealing with our larger extended family, it reminds us that regardless of what we go through, that God is with us every step of the way. And when we examine the meaning of these two protagonists in the book of Hosea, Hosea being the prophet, and his wife, name is Gomer. Well, Hosea means deliverance. And his wife, who is the prostitute, who keeps on going astray, is her name, Gomer, means completion. And so you might be asking, well, how can a woman of harlotry or a prostitute be called completion? And you might be wondering, well, how does that work? Or how does this couple's dynamic work? What was God thinking? Well, God is thinking exactly this. That Hosea, being that faithful servant of God, totally united with God, in the belief that God's love is unfailing and steadfast, seeks out the restoration or the bringing back or the returning of his wife, and works towards that end because he is the vehicle through which Gomer, his wife, will be delivered. And it is through Hosea, it is through his dynamic relationship with Gomer that he will end up fulfilling the full, complete picture of his family. She is going to be the very torture, the very process, the very catalyst towards him really being that loving, steadfast individual representing God's love, which is loving and unfailing and steadfast. And through his faithfulness as God's son, really allows Gomer the opportunity to complete her destiny as a beautiful daughter of God. It's an incredibly powerful message because basically, regardless of where we are in life, the message is clear, it is simple, it is concise. Rough paths, you can be a prostitute even, like Gomer. But God doesn't see Gomer as a prostitute. God sees her as completion, a daughter of completion. And in that steadfast and unfailing love, we can find inspiration, we can be empowered, we can be hopeful, and we can be so ignited to really connect the rest of the world through God by becoming Hoseas ourselves, by becoming like the prophet Hosea. We can become the vehicle of delivering the world to God, really delivering God's love to the world. And it becomes a beautiful partnership of sorts on so many different levels. And so again, you don't get a sense of God just sitting there and basically, like a judge in a court of law. You come before the Lord, the judge, basically bestow a commandment on you, whether you're guilty or not. That is not the kind of image we have in Hosea. In Hosea, we have very much an image of God as a parent. God is willing to absorb the punishment that Israel deserves. God is willing to absorb the punishment that Gomer deserves. But working in conjunction with Hosea, he is going to make her complete. Her end will be completion. He is not going to turn her into trash or, throw her away. She is that unique handiwork of God. And God is going to do whatever it takes to restore and to return her to God and to this beautiful vision that God has of Gomer as this woman of completion. And we realize that the God of Hosea is not a God that is just going to wait around and, tap his fingers on the table, wondering when his children are going to wake up. But God is like a parent who enables these protagonists towards repentance, in that God is not just waiting, but he is turning to find the lost sheep in the flock. And so God is actively seeking out, and Hosea is actively seeking out to really express God's desire for Gomer's deliverance. Hosea is not going to give up, and he is not going to sit around. He is actually going to be proactive about it. Whether she likes it or not, he is coming. He is going to help her. He is going to enable her towards repentance and towards her return and towards her restoration as that woman of completion. It is absolutely a beautiful, beautiful work or a book in the Bible. And so you might ask, well, what does the book of Hosea have anything to do with an American quilt? Well, American Quilt is something that is really beautiful, and I come to realize its value more and more as I live through my life. And one of the things that I always found incredibly fascinating about my father, the Reverend Myung, was that, he was so capable and very dexterous with his hands, and he was, of course, trained as he studied mechanical engineering, and so he has a very scientific mind, but at the same time incredibly creative and artistic, and he loves to create things with his hands. And in his autobiography, he talks about how when he was young, he would spend time knitting. Can you imagine my father, this big, strong man, sitting down and knitting a beautiful woolen cap? And he kind of jokingly says in his autobiography that his cap was so stylish and so fashionable that it was very much admired. And in that same train of thoughts, I've had my hand certainly in trying out knitting and sewing and, arts and crafts and all, making all this needlework and knitting rugs. And these were some of my favorite pastimes when I was growing up. But one of the things that really kind of struck me about quilt making is that sometimes the most beautiful quilt comes from scraps or garbage or thrown out fabrics that nobody wants. And many times, sometimes at churches or sometimes at social gatherings or quilting sessions, people bring buckets or, bags of these discarded fabrics that they want to sew into this beautiful quilt that these people will be making together. And you realize that one of the things about the quilt is that it kind of constitutes a contribution of many people or many types of things that have graced our lives over the years. I knew this one woman who created a beautiful quilt out of all the furniture that her husband and she had had over the years. She would save scraps from different furniture, cloth furniture that she and her husband had. And that was like their thing, from their old furniture to this beautiful quilt. And you realize that a lot of the quilt that I made, some pieces came from discarded fabrics that didn't quite make it into my beautiful skirt or my beautiful dress. Some came from old curtains that were no longer fashionable to be hanging on our walls, or some were just scraps that I've collected over the years. But again, it constitutes a contribution of many, many people, many different people and many different kind of lifestyle. And the most beautiful thing about a quilt is that it has the ability to bring fabrics together that would not otherwise be seen together. It's almost like bringing the haves and have-not together and everything in between. And somehow, in this grand design or the blueprint of what we want to create out of all these discarded fabrics, all these garbage or trash or these worthless piece of fabric finds brand new life in this beautiful artwork of what we can enjoy as a blanket or a place of comfort and safety for a lot of us. But one of the things about the American quilt or the quilt that I have come to know is that, yeah, sure, you can buy a what is it, like a machine-made quilt at the store for a couple $100, but it's just not the same as a handmade quilt. And why is that? Well, because something handmade, that love and patience and care went into hours and hours of putting these pieces together. And that when you are dealing with a handmade quilt, the handmade quilt always has the side that is shown, that shows this beautiful blanket, but it also has an underside. And when you look at the underside, you realize how these pieces have come together. And for me, that always symbolized how God and parents, as this Hosea-like figure, pulling the needle through all these different fabrics, are bringing these odd-shaped, garbage, trash fabrics together, meaningless fabrics together, and giving them new life by sewing them together with love and forgiveness and patience. And you realize the handiwork, the amount of work that is needed by looking not at the front of the quilt, but by looking at the underside. And so it kind of gives me a hope that even in this imperfect world, God and Messiah and true parents will find a way to bring these odd pieces together into a beautiful work of art. So for me, one artistic way or one poetic way of understanding what the Messiah is, well, the Messiah asked the true parents, come, to really take the guilt of humanity and create that and transform that and transition that through their love, forgiveness, and patience by threading all these pieces together into a beautiful work of art, or what I call an American quilt. And that's what's so beautiful about this country of America. It's not homogeneous. You have all different types with all different backgrounds and all different, education types, different economic backgrounds, and it's just so many people believing so many different things. But as a country, they come together. They're almost like sewn together by the American spirit, and they become proud Americans. And in essence, that is very, very much expressed to me artistically in the form of an American quilt. And again, the underside shows that it kind of reminds us that not only do we see the beautiful external side of the quilt, the finished product, but the underside is just as important because it shows the work in process, or what I call dealing with all the problems and trials and tribulations and in the journey towards creating that ideal family. When you look at the underside, you realize that so many pieces are flawed, so many pieces are fallible, so many pieces are broken. But it is these pieces that speak to us when they come together, bound by this thread of true love, that speaks volumes in terms of its unified beauty. And I think that is something that we need to keep in mind, because again, the message of the American quilt to me is the same as the message that is expressed to me so clearly in the Book of Hosea, that a rough past and a difficult present does not necessarily lead to a failed or a broken future, but a rough past and a difficult present can be a beautiful future as long as we are united with God, as long as we are united with our true parents. So, when you look at a machine-made quilt that you can buy for a couple bucks, a couple $100 at some of the finest stores around, everything is perfect. The outer, the exterior, as well as the interior, the underside is perfect. You don't see the fraying, you don't see the broken pieces, or you don't see the tattered pieces being sewn together. And it's kind of represents what I think we in the modern day expect from our lives, in that we want that pre-packaged dinner that we can just put in the microwave, shoot 2 minutes and 50 seconds and voila, the dinner comes out. Well, we realize that most families, or usually all families, are not pre-packaged that way. Otherwise, we would totally be robotic, and God wouldn't be able to really enjoy the love that we freely decide to give when we voluntarily decide to love God with our lives and with our utmost being. Likewise, God finds incredible pleasure when he experiences this love that is not pre-programmed. God didn't pre-program us that we will love God from the moment we're born to the moment we died. But he gave us this 5% responsibility so that we can decide to love. And it's this ability for us to love that gives the one receiving the love the greatest amount of pleasure and joy. And we realize that, that is the reason why we don't want things that are machine made. We want things that are organic, that is handcrafted. Because machine made, or something robotic, something pre-programmed, can be absolutely perfect. It can be absolutely orderly. The communities can be orderly. The individuals can be perfect. The individuals, add something without taking. They give without asking, and everybody is just a wonderful, wonderful, charming being. But we realize that in life, most situations are not like that. Many times we come from broken, fallible, or flawed families, and we try our best to create beautiful families, but in the process, we deal with things that are broken, that are flawed, that are fallible, but we still go on because we believe in God. We hang on to God. We hang on to true parents because we want to complete the vision that God has for each and every one of us. We want to be that man and woman of completion, just like Gomer, working in conjunction, working together in partnership with Hosea, her husband, or deliverance. And so again, we realize that the American quilt really symbolizes all these diverse types of people, all these, haves and have-nots, or what we considered as the trash of society, the meaningless of society. But God and true parents says, no, you are that complete man and a woman of God. And it is love and forgiveness that will bind us all into this thing that we call a family. And the message is very clear in the American quilt. We all need each other. The rough and sometimes the most ugly fabric comes to become actually the focal point of a beautiful quilt. It doesn't matter who or where we come from. Everybody is unique, and it is that unique factor that can turn an average quilt into something absolutely amazing, absolutely stupendous. And so we realize that in this community of creating the American quilt, you cannot have a community without unity. And we realize that you can't have unity without somebody binding this together. And we realize that the person binding all of us together is God. And on earth here, our representative is true parents. And in true parents, we have the unity of heaven and earth for the first time in providential history. We have Father up in spirit world. We have true mother here. And we realize that when we look at the American Quilt and when we read the Book of Hosea, it's kind of telling us, find a reason to unite. Don't separate yourself from each other, because we all need each other. We all depend on each other. We are at our best when we work together. Find a reason to unite. And so when we realize that true parents is the symbol of deliverance for us, and we may be like Gomer, constantly being unfaithful to God, just like the way Israel was. But regardless of how unfaithful and how much we try to separate ourselves from God and stand apart, God is not going to give up. And true parents are not going to give up, whether we like it or not, because their love is steadfast and unfailing. It's the parental love that really allows all the children of the world, all the men and women of the world, to come together as one family. That's why when Father shared with us this quote, he said, "Who is in charge of pulling out the nail driven so deeply into the heart of God and true parents on earth?" In a way, when you whore against God or when you whore against your own spouse, there cannot be a nail driven more deeply than that. Is it extraordinarily painful? But Father goes on to say true parents are in charge. When he says that true parents are in charge, it means true parents carry the responsibility with full authority. And he goes on to say the individual who completes this work. So true parents are in charge. But the one that completes this work is true mother, who was born with the last name Han, Hannara Han, one family Han, one nation Han. That's what her name means. That is her namesake. And true Father is clearly saying that true parents are in charge, heaven and earth united in the body of true parents, but it is mother who will carry out this task. So at this appointed time, when God is asking to really be that vehicle of deliverance and really help the world come to an understanding or an awareness that we need to complete our picture, and we do so by uniting with God and we're uniting with true parents, God is asking our community, the unificationist community, to really be that living testament. To be that living testament, to really kind of have the spirit of the American quilt, together with our true parents, weaving that needle through all the different types of discarded fabrics of the world and in our society and in our family. Because it is through this weaving process that we become one family. And so it's absolutely amazing to me how, true mother has really become her own symbol of authority after true father's passing. And, having been a housewife for over 5 decades, transitioned from that role to becoming a worldwide leader of a worldwide movement is certainly not an easy process. But the work that she is doing is absolutely incredible. She understands the importance of education. She understands the importance of witnessing, reaching out, being proactive, not just waiting for the world to realize that they need to come and really unite with God and true parents, but actively seeking out our children, seeking out our family members out there in the larger world. And she has also been house cleaning of sorts. I think one of the biggest problems that we were dealing with in our movement is the Cheyong Peyong Providence that has been taking place for quite some time. But just recently, in a matter of 3 weeks, in a wonderful woman's fashion, instead of causing huge havoc and destructive patterns of leadership and carrying out certain things that will effectuate the termination of certain people, what she was able to do was to really kind of tap in to the family of Kim Hyun-nam and her husband and her son, who owned all these things in their own name, and really inspired them and encouraged them to hand everything back to God and to true parents, which they did. And so under new management and new leadership, now True Mother is in total control of Cheyong Peyong, and the providence continues. And she will continue to put things in order, and she will continue to work towards creating that beautiful family, that beautiful society, and of course nation and world. And so where should you and I be in terms of our contribution to the work of providence? Well, I think that when you look at the example of the Book of Hosea and the example of the American Quilt, it speaks very, very strongly to me about the importance of having that unified spirit and heart with our God and our true parents. And upon the foundation of that unity, what God is clearly saying to all of us in the Book of Hosea is that rough past, difficult present can have a beautiful future. And again, in this beautiful artistic expression of an American quilt, God speaks to me in the same way, the same message. All these scraps of fabric have come from a rough past, and they could find themselves in difficult present, garbage bins and trash cans and all sorts of horrendous places. But it can have a beautiful future when it is true love that weaves these fabrics together, when it is true love of God and true parents that we are absolutely united with. So in the spirit of the Book of Hosea and in the spirit of the American Quilt, I wish you a wonderful week. And please have a week filled with incredible gratitude that we have this opportunity to call God our Heavenly Parent, and we have our true parents here with us, working together with us, walking together with us. So let's be the grateful children and really be that complete men and women of God. So God bless and take care. Bye-bye. If you have any questions and comments, please leave them below the video or go to injinmoon.com and use the contact form, or subscribe to our email list. And if you would like to contribute to our work here at iHome Church, just click on the donate button. Thank you and God bless. Bye-bye.